Judge Amina Rhodes stood tall behind her mahogany bench, the gavel cold in her hand, the weight of justice pressing heavy on her shoulders. The courtroom in downtown Atlanta buzzed with tension, the kind that prickled skin and tightened throats. Then it happened. Without warning. Officer Brent Maddox, a hulking figure in a pristine blue uniform, lunged from the witness stand. His boots pounded across the polished floor like war drums, and before anyone could react, he slammed his boot into Amina's ribs with a sickening crack. The sound echoed, a violent punctuation mark in a room meant for order. She collapsed. Gasps sucked the air from the gallery. Some rose to their feet, others froze, their phones trembling in their hands. Maddox sneered, standing over her like a conqueror, a smug curl on his lips as if he'd just silenced a nuisance, not assaulted a judge. But 4 minutes later, 4 eternal, blistering minutes, blood on her lip, pain ricocheting through her chest, Amina rose. Steady, defiant, regal. "I'm the judge here." Her voice cut like a blade through the stunned silence. The deputies hesitated, their eyes flickering between her and Maddox, the badge on his chest glinting like a shield of immunity. But when her finger pointed and her words rang again, "Arrest him!" they moved. Cold steel wrapped around Maddox's thick wrists, and the sound of the handcuffs clinking was louder than any gavel could ever be. The room stirred with disbelief. Attorneys shifting uncomfortably, their pens still in mid-air, the public whispering, phones already streaming. Amina straightened, ignoring the searing pain in her ribs. She was 42, black, a product of Atlanta's South Side, and she'd earned her seat with blood, sweat, and brilliance. And still, a white officer believed he could knock her down and walk away untouched. But not today. Not this time. Later, as her robe lay discarded in a shadowed alley outside the courthouse, the city whispered of what came next. Because when systems are built to protect monsters like Maddox, retaliation comes quick and brutal. But so does truth. And before this storm calms, you will want to be here. If you stand with Amina, if you believe black women have the right to hold power without fear, smash that like button. Drop A in the comments if you're already on her side. And subscribe now, because tomorrow's episode will have your jaw on the floor. What's coming for Amina is more than a legal battle. It's a war for her name, her son, and the soul of the justice system itself. The system just got caught with its hands dirty, and we're about to dig deeper. The ibuprofen dulled the pain, but not the rage. Judge Amina Rhodes sat alone in her chambers, ribs throbbing beneath the bandage hidden under her blouse. The courtroom was quiet now. The chaos, the gasps, the metallic click of handcuffs closing around Officer Brent Maddox's wrists, all of it had faded into silence. But in her head, the moment played on a loop, his boot slamming into her side. The sickening crunch, the stunned disbelief in the room, and then her rising, bloodied but unbroken, to declare, "I'm the judge here." She had won, if only for a moment. She had stood up to a system that had never been built for her and demanded it listen. For once, it had. But justice is not only about truth. It is about power. Who has it, and who decides how the story is told? Amina's phone buzzed across her desk. She expected a message of solidarity, maybe a statement from the Chief Justice, or a flood of support from the legal community. Instead, what she saw made her stomach lurch. A thumbnail of her courtroom, grainy, low-res, with the title, "Judge Assaults Officer During Courtroom Breakdown." Her breath caught. She tapped the screen, heart hammering. And there it was. Edited footage, skewed angle. A frame where her hand was raised, midpoint, perhaps, or maybe just a motion to stand. But the context twisted like a blade. The voiceover was slick, rehearsed. "Chaos in the Atlanta courthouse today, as Judge Amina Rhodes appeared to lunge at decorated officer Brent Maddox. She froze. Her pulse roared in her ears. The video didn't show Maddox's kick, didn't show her writhing on the floor, didn't show the gasp from the crowd or the fear in the deputy's eyes. Instead, it showed her as the aggressor, her voice digitally enhanced to sound shrill. Maddox's pre-recorded statement followed, him outside the precinct, free and smug. "I was just defending myself. She came at me. I feared for my safety. Judges shouldn't get emotional. She's unfit. Always knew her kind couldn't handle power." Her kind. The words landed harder than his boot had. She stared at the screen as comments poured in beneath the video. Typical angry black woman. Another thug in a robe. Time to clean up the courts. Amina's fingers tightened around her phone. Her vision blurred, not from the tears she refused to shed, but from the fury pounding behind her eyes. This wasn't just an online smear. It was a campaign, a strategy. The system wasn't waiting for her to defend herself. It had already moved to bury her. Her email pinged again. An official notice. The precinct was releasing Maddox. New evidence, they claimed. Her evidence, the footage she had submitted, triple-checked, logged into evidence lockup, had suddenly corrupted. A glitch. No backup. Gone. The one thing that proved everything, a lifeline turned to dust. Worse still, she was now charged, obstruction of justice and falsifying the record. The irony punched the air from her lungs. She was the one bleeding. She was the one kicked in open court. But now, somehow, she was the criminal? Her hands trembled as she rose from her desk. The system wasn't broken. It was functioning exactly as designed. This wasn't just Brent Maddox. This was Chief Marshal Kessler, the one who had loomed in her courtroom that day, silent and calculating. His gray eyes had spoken louder than any threat. This was him pulling strings, quietly, effectively, turning her resistance into ammunition against her. She left the courthouse into a night that felt heavier than most. The air clung to her skin like a warning. Outside, whispers chased her like shadows. Clerks wouldn't meet her eyes. Bailiffs, who'd once nodded with respect, now looked through her. "Heard she started it," one muttered. "I always said she had an attitude," another whispered. Their words sliced deeper than the cracked rib. But the worst was yet to come. Her car rolled into her driveway, headlights cutting across the lawn. She froze. A crowd. Red hats, cell phones held high, signs that read, "Lock her up," "Justice for Maddox," "Corrupt judge," her mouth dried. She parked a block away, heart racing as she watched. Then a bottle soared through the air, shattered against her door. Glass sparkled like ice in the grass. Another chant rose, "Get her out!" Her son was inside. She fumbled for her phone. Texted Malik, "Stay low, I'm coming." But before she could move, a black pickup truck barreled around the corner. Hooded men leapt from the bed. One hurled a brick straight through her windshield. Glass sliced her cheek. She ducked, blood warm on her skin. Then, through the haze, she saw him. Maddox, standing free, grinning. "Told you, Judge. You'll pay for crossing me." Then came the Molotov. The bottle arced. Fire bloomed. Her porch exploded in orange flame. She ran, ribs screaming, lungs burning, and ducked into shadows as another call came through. Unknown number. She answered, a gravel voice, cold as ice. "Back off, or your family's next." And just like that, the victory she thought she'd earned was ashes. And her truth? Burned away by a system that had rewritten the story before the ink of her wounds had dried. This isn't just a story of injustice. It's a manual of how systems erase the truth. How even when you bleed for what's right, The world can paint you as wrong. Amina fought. She stood. And they flipped it. Her strength became their weapon. Her platform, their battleground. And yet, this isn't the end. No, this is just the beginning of the war. She didn't sleep that night. Judge Amina Rhodes sat slumped in her sedan, hidden in the shadows of a crumbling parking deck downtown, the wind whispering through the broken concrete. Her robe, once a symbol of power, lay crumpled on the passenger seat like discarded hope. Her ribs throbbed. The cut on her cheek had dried into a crimson crust. And her son, Malik, was texting her from the house she no longer dared go near. "Mom, is it safe?" She didn't know how to answer. So, just hours earlier, she was a respected judge presiding over the Atlanta courts. Now the headlines had flipped her into a villain. The video that exposed her as the aggressor against Officer Brent Maddox was spreading like wildfire, leaving out the boot that cracked her ribs, the blood on her lip, the gasps from the courtroom. And worse, her evidence of the assault, footage that clearly showed Maddox attacking her, was now corrupted, lost, gone. The chain of custody mysteriously broken. That footage was her shield, her only defense in a city where the system didn't bend for people like her. But they took it, just like they took her reputation, her bench, and now, her safety. And they weren't done. Her phone buzzed again. A forwarded message from her clerk. "Due to new evidence, Officer Maddox has been released. Judge Amina Rhodes is being charged with obstruction of justice and falsifying official testimony." Her heart slammed against her bruised chest. She was the one bleeding on the courtroom floor, and now they were trying to cage her. Amina tried to breathe through it, through the rising nausea, the swelling fear. She wasn't just being discredited, she was being hunted. She had challenged a decorated officer. She had demanded accountability. And in return, the system was moving like a machine, grinding her down with precision. That's what they do, she thought. Turn the whistleblower into the threat. She drove aimlessly through Atlanta's veins, Peachtree, Edgewood, Northside, trying to find somewhere safe. But safety was a luxury she no longer had. Every precinct was off limits. Every courthouse was a trap. She pulled over near an old gas station and dialed Jamal, her clerk, voice low. "I need the original footage, the one we submitted. I need it now." "I tried, Judge. It's gone. Deleted. Not just corrupted, erased from the log. They're saying it was never there." The line fell silent. Her proof, the truth, had been wiped clean. Then came the first threat. A video surfaced online. Maddox outside the precinct, free, calm, flanked by uniformed officers who stood like statues. "She lunged at me," he said to reporters. "I defended myself. It's a shame what she's trying to do. Judges like her make it harder for all of us." His voice dripped with smugness. The crowd behind him, red hats, American flags, and signs reading "Blue Lives Matter More," cheered as if he'd just won a war. And just like that, her city began to turn. Within hours, her inbox filled with hate, death threats, racial slurs. Her face was plastered across news feeds with headlines like "Corrupt Black Judge Attacks Hero Cop" and "Should Activist Judges Be Removed?" She even saw a deepfake video circulating, her face altered to make it look like she'd screamed racial epithets at Maddox before the altercation. It was laughable. She barely raised her voice, but it didn't matter. Facts weren't armor, and lies moved faster than justice. Then the mob came. Her house, a modest 2-story tucked away in Vine City, had once been her sanctuary. The place where Malik learned to ride his bike, where she spent nights studying case law with a glass of wine and her late husband's photo watching over her from the mantel. But that night, the lawn flooded with angry faces. A crowd swelled outside, chanting, "No justice, no peace." But this time, not for her. For him. She parked a block away, watching in horror as signs bobbed in the air. "She's a liar." "Unfit for the bench." "Lock her up." Then came the brick. It smashed her car's rear window, spraying shards across her back seat. She ducked, blood trickling from a cut on her temple, and called Malik. "Mom," he cried, "there's smoke coming from the porch." "Get to the basement," she ordered. "Now!" The porch went up in flames moments later. A Molotov cocktail hurled through the air, an arc of fire that set their welcome mat ablaze and ignited the wooden steps. She watched helplessly from the shadows. And then she saw him. Maddox. Out of uniform, hoodie pulled low, but unmistakable. His grin was pure venom. "You think you can beat this system?" he shouted across the chaos. "You're nothing, Judge Rhodes." Then her phone rang. Unknown number. She answered. A gravel voice on the line. "Back off, or your son disappears next." Her blood froze. She floored the gas and sped to the back alley, pounding on the storm door. Malik was safe, for now. But that moment marked a line she couldn't uncross. This was war. Not just against her, but against anyone who dared to speak truth into the system's rot. Against black women who rose too high. Against single mothers who carried both a child and a cause. Against survivors of the system who came back to dismantle it. She couldn't go home again, so she ran. A dingy motel off I-85. A fake name at the front desk. A burner phone. Every time she stepped outside, she wore a hoodie pulled low. Every time she saw a patrol car, her breath caught. She became a ghost in her own city, hiding from a badge she used to serve alongside. Days passed. Her face spread across cable news. They played loops of her altercation, edited for drama, framed for outrage. One commentator called her an angry judge with a vendetta. Another asked, "Why are we letting activist judges push anti-police narratives?" But the worst blow came 1 week later. The Georgia Judicial Board announced her suspension, pending investigation. They cited inappropriate conduct, potential falsification of events, and actions that endangered public trust. She stared at the screen as the news anchor's voice clipped through the motel's static-filled TV. Suspended. Stripped. Disgraced. Her bench. Her name. Her life's work. Gone. And still, she didn't stop. Because the truth hadn't changed. She had felt that kick. She had tasted her own blood. She had watched the system twist her pain into their power. But even in hiding, she wasn't done. She met with Trey, a former cop turned PI, in the back of a diner with flickering neon and bad coffee. Together, they started to dig. Old complaints against Maddox, cover-ups, unsealed documents, and behind them all, a pattern and a signature, Chief Marshal Kessler, the man who watched her from the courtroom as she ordered Maddox's arrest, the one who didn't flinch when the boot landed, who didn't blink when the gavel fell. He had been waiting for her to rise so he could push her off the edge. And he had. But what Kessler didn't know, what Maddox couldn't imagine, was that Amina was forged in fire long before they struck the match. She wasn't just hiding anymore. She was hunting. Judge Amina Rhodes had always known that speaking the truth in a system built on silence came with consequences. But she never imagined it would come wrapped in smoke, fire, and the image of her child standing at the edge of terror. The night her house burned wasn't just an attack. It was a message, a declaration. She had gone too far. And now they were coming for her soul. The flames rose fast, greedy tongues of fire curling around the porch columns, crackling through the air like laughter. A bottle had shattered just seconds before. A Molotov cocktail thrown with precision, fury, and purpose. She'd watched it from down the street, parked in a borrowed car with a busted windshield, and her breath caught in her throat. Her ribs still ached from Maddox's boot. Her cheekbone throbbed from broken glass, and her heart had been racing since the mob showed up unannounced on her lawn. Faces contorted with hate, shouting her name like a curse. Her son, Malik, was inside. That fact hit her like a freight train, slamming through bone and reason. She bolted from the car, feet pounding against cracked pavement, every breath a stab of pain. "Malik!" she screamed, her voice slicing the chaos. "Malik, answer me!" Her fingers fumbled for her phone, dialing, praying. 1 ring, 2. Then, "Mom, I'm hiding. The front's on fire." "Stay low. I'm coming." Her voice cracked under the weight of terror. She couldn't lose him. She could survive losing her bench, her title, her reputation, but not him. Then she saw him. Officer Brent Maddox, standing outside the burning home, far from handcuffs, far from punishment, free, proud, smirking. His hoodie pulled up, but his posture unmistakable. He held a second bottle in one hand, a lit rag in the other, its flame flickering like a devil's tongue. "Told you, Judge," he roared over the crowd, who now cheered him like a conquering hero. "You'll regret ever crossing me." The second Molotov sailed through the air. She didn't even think. She moved, ribs screaming, breath gone, sprinting toward the porch. A blast of heat slapped her across the face as the bottle exploded near the stairs. Glass sliced through her jeans, embedding in her thigh. Blood welled, but she didn't care. She had to get to Malik. But then her phone rang again. Unknown number. She hesitated. Just a blink. And answered. A man's voice, low and gravel-coated, rasped through the receiver. "Back off, Judge, or your family's next, starting with your boy." The line went dead. The silence was louder than the fire. That moment broke something in her. It wasn't just rage. It was something deeper. Sharper. A scream buried beneath a mother's bones. They were hunting her child. The flames weren't the only thing threatening to destroy her. They were simply the most honest. She slammed through the back gate, kicking in the basement door. Smoke poured down the stairs like a tidal wave. She dropped low, heart pounding, and crawled through the haze until she found Malik curled behind the water heater, face streaked with ash, eyes wide with fear. "I got you," she whispered, dragging him out, shielding his body with hers as they scrambled through the smoke-choked corridor. Outside, sirens finally howled in the distance, but too late. Her house, her sanctuary, was an inferno. Her neighbors stood and watched, some filming, some whispering. One man muttered, "Good, she brought this on herself." Another woman said, "I warned you about stirring things up." She wanted to scream, but all she could do was kneel in the grass, Malik wrapped in her arms, the fire painting their faces orange and red as it consumed everything they had built. And then she saw it, a swastika spray-painted on her charred front door, black and fresh, the paint still dripping. Beneath it, a note pinned with a blade. "Quit, or we'll bury you deeper." Her blood ran cold. The police arrived minutes later. Blank stares, shrugged shoulders. A single officer looked around and said, "Looks like gang activity." Gang activity? "This was organized," she hissed. "You can't see that?" But they didn't care. They never did. Not when the target was a black woman with power. Not when the system saw her as the problem, and the violence against her as correction. That night, she took Malik and drove. Nowhere in particular. Just away. They ended up in an old motel off the highway, the kind where the lights flicker and the air smells of mold and rust. Malik slept in her lap, trembling even in his dreams. Aisha stared at the ceiling, ribs aching, burns on her hands, the word "quit" echoing in her mind. But she wouldn't. Because if she did, then what was it all for? The cases she'd fought to overturn, the families she'd helped, the girls who saw her and whispered, "That could be me someday." They could take her house, they could take her bench, but they would not take her purpose. The next morning she called Trey, the ex-cop turned private investigator who had already dug up Maddox's buried misconduct. Her voice was steel. "Find me everything on Kessler. I don't care how deep you have to go. I want proof of what he's protecting. I want names. I want records. I want leverage." Trey didn't argue. He knew better now, and within 48 hours, he brought her what she needed. Buried files, whispered payments, photos, links between Chief Kessler and a known white supremacist group, the Georgia White Alliance. Funds funneled, internal complaints suppressed, records scrubbed, officers promoted for silence. It was everything, and it could burn down the whole damn machine. She drove to the one journalist she still trusted, Leah Carter, a bulldog from the Atlanta Sentinel, who had once lost a job for refusing to bury a story on police brutality. She met her in a parking garage at midnight, slammed the folder on the hood of Leah's car. "Print it," she said. "No edits, no sugar. Tell them the truth." And by noon the next day, the city knew everything. The headline screamed across every screen, "Atlanta's top cop linked to white supremacist group." The article went viral in under an hour. Hashtags trended. Crowds gathered outside precincts. Protesters flooded the courthouse steps. "Justice for Judge Rhodes," they chanted. "Burn the system down." She watched from a borrowed motel room, Malik asleep beside her, the glow of her phone lighting her battered face. She wasn't smiling. Not yet. But she felt it. The tide was turning. But you know how this works by now, don't you? The system doesn't go down without a fight. Within hours, another headline dropped. One meant to gut her all over again. "Judge Rhodes under federal investigation for corruption. Bribery allegations surface." She stared at the screen, her knees buckled. It was a frame job. Another trap. This time with forged bank records and unnamed sources. Another lie. Another weaponized smear. But this time, she didn't collapse. She didn't cry. She turned to Malik, kissed his forehead, and whispered, "They're scared." And that meant they were finally bleeding. The morning after the fire, Judge Amina Rhodes woke up in a cheap motel room with the taste of ash in her mouth and her son's weight pressed against her side. Malik was still sleeping, his face bruised from the chaos, his arm bandaged from where he'd tripped running from the blaze. The room was too quiet, like the city was holding its breath. Amina's ribs burned. Her cheek throbbed from the brick that sliced her skin. Her phone was full of threats, her house a pile of blackened wood and scorched memories. And yet, she was still standing. Barely. But standing. And that meant they hadn't won. Not yet. She pulled herself from the bed, careful not to wake Malik, and stared into the cracked bathroom mirror. Her face looked like a war zone. Dark rings under her eyes, a fresh cut across her jaw, blood crusted behind her ear. But her eyes? Her eyes were steel. They tried to erase her. They tried to burn her out. But they made a mistake. They forgot who they were dealing with. She was a judge, yes. But before that, she was a survivor. A single mother who'd raised a son while climbing through the sharpest parts of the legal system. A black woman who knew how to fight back without warning, without apology. And now? She was going to make them bleed. She dialed Trey, her closest ally, a wiry, sharp-eyed former cop turned PI. He picked up on the first ring, his voice gravelly with exhaustion. "They burned my house," she said. No emotion. Just truth. "I saw it on the news," he said. "I'm sorry, Amina." "They painted a swastika on my door. Left a note." Her voice cracked. Said if I don't quit, they'll bury me deeper. Silence on the other end. I want everything, Trey. Everything on Maddox and Kessler. I don't care how deep we have to go. We're taking this system apart. Trey didn't hesitate. Give me 24 hours. It only took him 12. He showed up at the motel the next morning, dark circles under his eyes and a thick manila folder in his hands. His fingers trembled as he set it on the table. You need to brace yourself, he said. Amina opened it. Inside were 20 separate complaints against Officer Brent Maddox. Excessive force, chokeholds, racial slurs, hospital records, swollen jaws, black eyes, broken bones, all from black men and women. None ever saw justice. Everyone marked "Zuot unsubstantiated." Most had been quietly settled. The rest vanished entirely. And everyone signed off by the same name, Chief Marshal Gregory Kessler. But that wasn't the worst of it. Trey flipped to the final page, a digital trail of payments, thousands of dollars funneled from a shell company with ties to a white supremacist group known as the Georgia White Alliance. And who received them? Kessler, the man behind Maddox, the one who had orchestrated Amina's public smear. The one who'd stood in that courtroom like a ghost, watching, waiting for her to fall. She stared at the evidence, her fingers tightening around the paper until her knuckles whitened. They've been running this game for years, Trey said quietly. Covering their own, funding hate, silencing anyone who gets too close. And now they've lit that hate on fire, Amina said. They came to my house. My son was inside. Trey nodded, jaw clenched. Let's return the favor. They met Leah Carter, an investigative journalist from the Atlanta Sentinel, in a church parking lot an hour later. Amina handed her the folder without a word. Leah flipped through it, her eyes widening with every page. If I run this, I won't be able to protect you. I don't need protection, Amina said. I need a spotlight. And by noon, the fire Amina had been waiting for finally ignited. The headline screamed across Atlanta. 20 complaints against Officer Maddox buried by Chief Kessler. Ties to white supremacy exposed. Screens lit up. Hashtags trended. #Justice for Amina. Expose Kessler. Burn the shield. Crowds gathered outside the precinct. Protesters surrounded the courthouse. News vans camped out overnight. And for the first time since this nightmare began, Amina felt it, the tide turning. Her phone buzzed every minute, messages of support from former clerks, civil rights attorneys, old classmates, strangers. You started something, Amina, Leah texted. You cracked it open. But even as hope flickered in the distance, she didn't let her guard down. Because the system never loses quietly. That night, as she walked back to the motel, Malik curled up on the couch. She spotted a black car parked near the dumpster. Tinted windows. Engine idling. Watching. Waiting. She didn't stop walking, but she made a decision. No more hiding. No more fear. No more silence. She went back inside and turned on the news. The coverage was still rolling. Kessler's name was everywhere. Anchors demanded his resignation. Former officers came forward anonymously. A protester was live on camera yelling, "We believe, Amina. We see the truth now." She turned to Malik and whispered, "We've got them scared." But fear, when cornered, fights back. Just after midnight, her burner phone buzzed again. No caller ID, just breathing on the other end. Then a voice she knew too well. "You're playing a dangerous game, Judge. You think the truth is going to save you? Think again." Click. She clutched the phone so hard it cracked. This wasn't a game. This was war. And tomorrow, she'd drop something even bigger. Judge Amina Rhodes never thought she'd feel true helplessness. Not after everything. After being kicked in her own courtroom, after watching her home burn, after being smeared across every screen in America. But nothing. prepared her for the moment she found her son's body bleeding in the alley. It wasn't supposed to be like this. For a moment there was hope. A flicker, after she leaked the dossier exposing Officer Maddox's buried brutality and Chief Kessler's ties to a white supremacist funding ring, the city had erupted. Protesters surrounded the precinct, hashtags trended, commentators demanded resignations. Her name, once dragged through the dirt, was now chanted in the streets. "Justice for Judge Rhodes!" And for a heartbeat, she let herself breathe. She drove to Aunt Lena's house in Vine City to hug Malik, to touch his face, and know he was safe. He opened the door before she even knocked. Lanky, bruised, but upright, his smile tired, but still real. "You winning, Mom," he whispered, as she wrapped him in a hug so tight her ribs screamed. For one night, they were okay, but good things didn't last for women like her. The next morning, her phone buzzed. It was Trey, her ally and PI, his voice tight, terrified. "Check on Malik, now." Her heart dropped. "He's right here." She turned, but he wasn't. She called out his name. No answer. "What's going on?" she demanded. "Video just surfaced. Says you found Malik hurt, near a dumpster behind Lena's place." Her blood went cold. She ran outside, sprinting down the street, lungs burning, her body still bruised, heart pounding like a war drum. She turned the corner into the alley and stopped cold. Malik. Crushed against a rusted dumpster, his shirt torn, his arm carved. The word slashed in red across his flesh read, "Your mom's dead." She collapsed to her knees, a scream tearing from her throat. She gathered his body into her arms, blood soaking her sleeves, trembling as she pressed her jacket to the wounds. He stirred. Barely. His pulse faint, but there. He wasn't dead. But he was close. She called 911, her voice broken. "My son's been attacked. He's bleeding. Please!" The officers arrived minutes later, their sirens loud, faces blank. They stepped out of their car, looked at Malik, and shrugged. "Gang stuff," one muttered. "You serious?" she snapped, rising to her feet. "He was targeted. This is retaliation. This is Maddox. This is Kessler." The officer looked at her like she was a problem. "You need to calm down, ma'am." "I am calm. You're the one ignoring a hate crime." "Not our jurisdiction," the other officer said, already writing on his pad. "Not our problem." Not our problem. Amina's blood boiled. Her son was bleeding in front of them, carved like a message. But these officers weren't here to help. They were here to look the other way, just like the others had when Maddox's boot met her ribs. Just like the courts had when her footage disappeared. She rode in the ambulance to Grady Memorial, holding Malik's hand, whispering through tears. "I'm here. I've got you. I've got you, baby." The paramedics worked in silence. The monitors beeped. The blood wouldn't stop. He would survive, they said. But the cuts were deep. The trauma deeper. She sat beside his hospital bed. The machines humming like ghosts. The fluorescent lights flickering above her. She stroked his hair, his carved arm now wrapped in white bandages, and felt a rage rise that she had no words for. Rage at the system. At the silence. At the way a 16-year-old boy could be nearly murdered and written off as gang activity because he was black, and his mother had dared to challenge power. Then the shadow arrived. Chief Kessler stepped into the room like he owned it. His suit was pristine, his hair perfectly combed, his gray eyes glittering like steel. He didn't sit, didn't soften. He just stood at the foot of Malik's bed and spoke. "Rough day, Judge?" His voice was smooth. Too smooth. "Kids get hurt when you push too hard." She rose slowly, her body shaking with fury. "You son of a—" He held up a hand. "Think about who's next before you keep digging." Then he turned, his polished shoes clicking across the linoleum, and disappeared down the hall. She stood frozen, blood boiling, fists clenched, tears streaming down her cheeks, not just from anger, but from fear, real fear. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was her son, her only child, her heart, and now he was marked. She looked down at Malik, at the way his eyelids fluttered in his sleep, his lips twitching like he was still running from them in his dreams. She had exposed Maddox. She had cracked Kessler's armor. She had turned the city's outrage into a weapon. But this attack, was a message. Clear and brutal. We can touch what you love. And now she had to decide. Was she going to keep fighting? Was she going to risk everything, again? She didn't hesitate. Yes. Because if she quit now, she'd be telling every black mother, every silenced voice, every person who ever believed in her that the system wins. That corruption gets to write the ending. That if you fight back, they get to hurt your children and walk away clean. No, she would not quit. She called Trey and whispered through clenched teeth, "Get me more. Get me everything. We're going to bury them." She stayed by Malik's side that night, her hand wrapped around his, whispering promises through the hum of machines. "I'll fix this," she said. "I don't care what I have to burn down. I'll fix this." And when he finally opened his eyes the next morning, barely awake, voice raspy, he whispered one sentence, "Don't stop, Mom." That was all she needed. Judge Amina Rhodes had filed plenty of lawsuits in her career. She had seen every tactic: delay, deny, deflect. She'd watched victims cry in the witness box, knowing the system wasn't built for them. But this time? This lawsuit was hers. This one carried her name. And it was personal. Her ribs still ached from Maddox's kick. Her jaw pulsed from the mob's brick. Her skin bore fresh burns from the firebombing of her home. And her son, Malik, still trembled in his sleep, his arm wrapped in gauze, the carved threat haunting his every breath. But Amina wasn't hiding anymore. She was marching into battle. "I'm suing the Atlanta PD," she told her team that morning, "for obstruction, assault, evidence tampering, and malicious prosecution." She dropped the stack of complaints Trey had unearthed onto the conference table like a gauntlet. Officer Maddox's brutality, long buried by bureaucracy and blood money, was now paper, now evidence. 20 complaints, all ignored. And Kessler's name? Signed off on every single one. It wasn't a rogue cop. It was a criminal network with uniforms and badges. Her lawyer, Carla Evans, flipped through the files with a tight jaw and eyes burning with purpose. "You know what you're doing, right? This isn't just a case, it's war." "I know," Amina said. "They already came for my son. What else can they take?" The press caught wind within the hour. Cameras swarmed the courthouse steps. Protesters shouted her name. "Stand with Amina!" Signs waved in the wind. "Hold the badge accountable. Justice for Malik. Justice for us all." For the first time since the smear campaign began, Amina felt something she hadn't dared feel. Hope. And yet hope felt dangerous. Because in this city, hope had always come at a price. The lawsuit was airtight. Trey's folder was their weapon. Carla's arguments sliced through the courtroom like fire through paper. Maddox's brutality, caught in witness statements. The security footage from the warehouse attack. The hacked text messages proving Kessler's hand in Malik's assault. Every piece stacked high on the judge's bench like bricks in a wall they couldn't ignore. The media ran with it. Atlanta PD under siege as Judge Rhodes strikes back. Protesters kept vigil outside the courthouse. College students painted murals of Amina's face, bruised but unbroken, holding a gavel like a sword. And through it all, she stayed quiet. Focused. In control. Until the verdict came in. The grand jury returned an indictment. Maddox, charged, excessive force, kidnapping, conspiracy, assault. The courtroom erupted, Reporters shouted questions. Carla squeezed Amina's hand. Malik, watching from the gallery, let out a shaky breath and whispered, "You did it, Mom." Outside, the city cheered. Amina walked down the courthouse steps to a crowd that roared her name. Her head held high, her bruises visible, her gavel raised in triumph. This was what justice was supposed to feel like. Until the bomb dropped, it came fast, cruel, and merciless, like everything else the system had thrown at her. A text from Trey, urgent and cryptic. "Turn on the news, now." She did, and the anchor's voice was cold, surgical. "Breaking. Judge Amina Rhodes implicated in corruption scandal. Bank records show alleged bribes to influence case outcomes." She froze. The screen cut to documents, her name, bank transfers, highlighted deposits from years ago. She hadn't seen those before, because they weren't real. "This is fake," she whispered. "This is a setup." Carla was already calling the judicial board, but it was too late. Her suspension came through that same hour. No hearing, no due process, no mercy. Just gone. She drove straight to Carla's office, the city blurring around her. Her hands trembled on the wheel. Her breath came short. "They're framing me," she said when she burst through the door. "They made fake records. I've never taken a dime." "I believe you," Carla said. But her eyes flicked toward the TV, where the footage played again. Amina stared at it. Her name twisted. Her face dragged through another smear. The crowd that once chanted for her now whispering in doubt. And then she saw him. Officer Maddox, standing outside the precinct again. In uniform. Smiling. "I told you," he said to the cameras. "She was a fraud, a liar, a thug in a robe." The reporters nodded. Some even laughed. She sank into Carla's chair, her voice a whisper. "I don't understand. How did they get into my financials? Who would even have access?" Carla didn't answer, but Amina already knew. She drove fast, angry, heart-sick, straight to Marcus Tate, her law school confidant, the one who had posted her bail, built her strategy, held her when she cried, pushed her to sue, believed in her. She burst into his office, but the receptionist looked up and blinked. "Marcus isn't in." "Where is he?" The woman shrugged. "Haven't seen him since yesterday." Then Amina's phone buzzed. It was Leah, her voice a whisper. "Audio just dropped. Marcus. Selling your files. Saying he planted everything." Amina's knees buckled. "No," she said, "that's not possible." But the audio was already playing. His voice, clear, calm, calculated. "She gave me everything. I sold it. 50 grand. Easy money. I told her I'd fight for her. But you know how it is. Too good a deal." She dropped the phone. The betrayal shattered her in ways bullets never could. Marcus hadn't just abandoned her. He sold her soul, her trust, her fight, her truth, turned into a weapon. The lawsuit she'd built, the movement she'd inspired, suddenly painted as a lie. He took the slush fund files, the proof of Kessler's corruption, and sold it. Now she was not just suspended. She was branded corrupt. Again. And this time, the story stuck. She stumbled out of the building. Her phone rang again. Unknown number. A voice, grinning. "You're finished, Judge. Your own people sold you out." She collapsed into her car, her breath ragged, her body shaking, her mind racing. Her hands bloodied from gripping the wheel too tight. She thought she'd won. She thought indicting Maddox was the breakthrough. She thought justice finally saw her. But this was deeper. They didn't just want her beaten. They wanted her discredited. And Marcus was their scalpel. Judge Amina Rhodes had faced courtrooms that wanted her silenced. She'd faced mobs that wanted her erased. She'd faced betrayal that nearly hollowed her out. But nothing came close to the fear she felt when they took Malik, her only son, 16 years old, brave, brilliant, still healing from the last time they'd come for him. One moment, he was safe at Aunt Lena's. The next, gone. Disappeared in broad daylight. 2 men, a van, a camera, then a photo texted to her burner phone. Malik duct-taped to a chair, his mouth gagged, eyes wide with terror. And across the image in dripping red letters, "Drop all charges or he dies." Amina's scream cracked the motel room walls. She fell to her knees, clutching the phone so tight it cut her palm. Trey rushed in seconds later, laptop in hand, voice shaky as he scanned the GPS data. "They're using a burner," he said, "but I got a ping. Industrial zone, old warehouse, off I-20. She didn't wait. She grabbed her coat, her ribs still bandaged from the crash, her wrist trembling in a brace. She shoved a kitchen knife into her sleeve. "You coming?" Trey looked at her, horrified. "You're not serious. Amina, you're hurt. They have my son!" That was all it took. They drove fast, silent. The city passed like shadows through glass. Her pulse was a drumbeat in her ears, every breath laced with fire. She hadn't slept, had barely eaten. But nothing mattered. Not her trial, not her broken bones. Only Malik. The warehouse loomed like a tomb, rusted metal and shattered windows, crouching in the dark like it was waiting. They parked down the block, no lights, no sound. Except inside. Voices. She crept in, knife gripped in her hand, Trey covering her with an old service pistol he'd dug from his glove box. They moved like ghosts through the broken frame of the building. Concrete. Oil. Rot. And then she saw him. Malik, tied to a chair, bruised, shaking. His head hung low, but he was alive. Standing over him, gun in hand, was Officer Maddox. And behind him, in the shadows, Chief Kessler. Amina's heart stopped. "Look who finally showed up," Maddox sneered, turning to face her. "Judge Hero, thought you could embarrass me? Take me down?" "You kidnapped my son," she said, voice shaking with rage. "You carved his arm. You burned our house. And now you think you're getting out of this?" He laughed. "Nobody's gonna miss a corrupt judge. Your whole life's a stain." Then he raised the gun to Malik's temple. And Amina lunged. She didn't think. She didn't hesitate. The knife slashed across Maddox's wrist, sending the gun clattering to the floor. He roared, grabbing her by the hair and slamming her into a crate. Her ribs screamed. Blood spilled from her mouth. But she didn't stop. She clawed his face, raking skin. He punched her, once, twice, but she headbutted him, stunning him long enough to kick the gun across the floor. Malik was yelling now, his chair tipping over, trying to crawl away even bound. Then Trey fired. A warning shot. It hit the wall inches from Kessler's head. "Back off!" Trey screamed. But Kessler didn't flinch. He stepped forward, drawing his own weapon, eyes cold. "You really think this ends here?" And then from behind him, he pulled Malik up by the collar, dragging him back into the darkness. "No!" Amina screamed, staggering after them, her breath ragged. "Take me, not him!" But Kessler just smiled. "You already took the bait, Judge," he said. "Now you burn with it." And then he lit the match. A firebomb, small, fast, and devastating, exploded near the back wall, igniting crates soaked in fuel. Flames roared to life instantly. Trey dragged Amina back as the ceiling groaned. Smoke swallowed the room. Maddox crawled toward the exit, clutching his bleeding wrist. Amina broke free and ran into the fire. She found Malik in a corner, still bound. She cut the rope with shaking hands, coughing, choking, blood in her mouth. "We have to go," she said, lifting him despite the searing pain in her ribs. But Kessler wasn't done. He stepped into the firelight, pistol raised, gun trained on Malik. "Drop him," he said, "or I end it now." Amina stood, shielding her son with her body. "Do it," she said, tears streaming down her cheeks. "But know this. You may shoot me. You may bury me, but I promise you, I will haunt you. In every courtroom, every headline, every mirror you pass, you'll never outrun what you've done." His hand trembled. And then Malik kicked him, a desperate, wild move. The shot fired wide. Trey tackled Kessler from behind, and the gun skidded across the floor. Flames surged. Beams crashed. Smoke thickened. Amina grabbed Malik and ran. They burst out the back door as the roof caved in. Fire licked at their heels. Trey stumbled after them, face blackened by smoke. Outside, Amina collapsed in the grass, clutching Malik. Sirens wailed in the distance. The warehouse glowed behind them, Kessler still inside. Or so she thought. Malik sobbed in her lap, his arms wrapped around her. "You came," he whispered. "Always," she said, voice breaking. And then she heard the laugh. From the shadows, Kessler. Burned, bloodied, limping, but alive. He stepped into the floodlights as the first cop cars arrived. And they didn't arrest him. They saluted. Amina's heart shattered again. He pointed to her. "That's your terrorist," he said. "She staged this, tried to kill me, burned the building to cover it." The officers raised their guns. On her, the flames devoured everything. The old mill exploded behind her in a blast of heat and shrapnel as Judge Amina Rhodes collapsed in the dirt beside the burning wreckage, her body a ruin of blood and fire, her arms wrapped tightly around Malik, who trembled in her grasp. Her shoulder gushed blood from the gunshot wound. Her leg was scorched, blistered. Her wrist throbbed in a half-torn brace. But none of it mattered. What mattered was this. Her son was alive. She had dragged him through the blaze, through the gunfire, through Kessler's last, desperate ambush. She had fought Maddox tooth and nail, slammed Kessler into the concrete, dodged bullets, kicked down doors. She had become fire, become vengeance, become survival itself. And now, she was dying. At least, that's what the world was about to believe. The sirens closed in. Medics rushed from behind trees and floodlights. Malik sobbed over her chest as they lifted her onto a stretcher, her voice barely a whisper in his ear. "You're safe now. Whatever happens next, remember that." The ambulance doors slammed shut. The siren wailed. Her blood soaked the sheets. Her vision faded as the monitor's beep turned flat. Amina Rhodes died on the way to the hospital. That was the story the nation was told. The news broke like a lightning bolt across every major network. Judge Amina Rhodes killed in mill explosion after rescuing son from white supremacist ambush, Kessler's confession confirmed. The nation mourned. Protesters wept. The footage of Amina, limping through fire, shielding her son with her body, was played on every screen, every hour. Hashtags trended. Justice for Amina. Our judge. Hashtag she fought back. Vigils popped up in Atlanta, in Chicago, in D.C. Murals bloomed across brick walls. Amina with a gavel in one hand, her son in the other, flames behind her, and truth burning in her eyes. And from the ashes, the dominoes fell. Kessler's confession, broadcast live before the ambush, couldn't be denied. His words, "Yes, I bombed the courthouse. Yes, I hunted her. Every drop of blood's on you for pushing me," echoed through every headline. His command to burn the mill was caught on Trey's hacked live feed. The world saw him for what he was, a monster in a tailored suit. Feds raided the Atlanta precinct. Dozens were arrested. Internal Affairs tore the department apart. Officer Maddox, already convicted, now faced additional charges tied to the attempted kidnapping and arson. His smirk was gone, his face hollow as he was dragged back to federal court. Chief Kessler was found dead in the rubble. Or so it was claimed. Some said his body was recovered. Others weren't so sure. The flames had eaten everything. But what mattered was this: his reign was over. Amina's death became legend. The martyr who fought a system that tried to erase her. And won. Children wrote essays about her. Judges quoted her courage in court. Her gavel, found near the mill, scorched but intact, was placed in a glass case at the Georgia Civil Rights Museum. But what no one knew, not even Malik, was that she wasn't dead. Not yet. 50 miles south of Atlanta, beneath an old farmhouse wired with stolen generators and blackout curtains, Amina jolted awake on a steel cot, her shoulder wrapped tight, her burns stitched. Her body felt like it had been dragged through fire, because it had. But she was alive. Alive because Marcus Tate had never betrayed her. The voice in that viral audio? Faked. The evidence planted to frame her? A setup designed to infiltrate the very machine Kessler used to destroy his enemies. Marcus had gone undercover the moment the courthouse bombing pinned blame on Amina. He knew she couldn't win this war from inside it, so he played the long game, fed disinformation, made it look like he'd turned, then pulled her out of the mill seconds before the structure collapsed, swapping her body with a burned cadaver stolen from a morgue Kessler once controlled. It was ugly, morally gray, but it worked. He saved her. So did Trey, who survived the warehouse explosion despite being left for dead. He'd been working behind the scenes ever since, leaking Kessler's financial ties to white supremacist PACs, sharing Maddox's brutal arrest record, and tracing each department bribe to the city's core. And now? Now Amina was a ghost. A dead woman with no limits, no jurisdiction, no badge, no chains. She watched her own funeral from the bunker's TV. Watched Malik cry over a grave that held no body. Watched the city burn with grief and outrage. Watched the nation turn its eye to Atlanta and ask how justice had cost one woman everything. Marcus sat beside her, his voice low. They think it's over. It's not, Amina said, her voice gravel and grit. No, Marcus agreed. It's just the beginning. The feds began rolling out reforms within days. Civil rights task forces launched in 3 major cities. Police oversight committees doubled their budgets. Amina's story ignited a movement, one she never expected to lead, from the shadows. But her mind stayed on Malik. She hadn't seen him since the mill. He thought she was gone. And that was the hardest part. Not the fire, not the lies, not the scars, the silence, the absence, the way his face twisted in grief on the screen. I have to let him think I'm dead, she whispered one night, her hand pressed to the glass of the TV screen. It's the only way he stays safe. But her voice cracked, and Marcus saw the pain beneath her armor. We'll bring him in, he promised, when it's time. And she nodded, because she knew. The machine wasn't done fighting. The purge was only step 1. The real corruption ran deeper. So she waited. Recovered. Watched the headlines. Helped Marcus from behind the curtain, feeding leaks, hacking documents, staging anonymous exposés. Her death had bought her freedom, and she was going to use it. One morning, weeks later, she saw Malik on the news again, this time not crying, but marching with a protest crowd. His sign read, "My mother taught me to fight." She smiled through the tears. He was becoming everything she hoped. And when the moment was right, she'd return. Not as a judge, not as a victim, but as something more, a symbol, a storm. The world believed Judge Amina Rhodes was gone, a casualty of the mill fire, a martyr who sacrificed herself to save her son. A legend burned into headlines, murals, and national memory, and Amina let them believe it. Because in death, she had become something she never could while alive, untouchable. Her death had blown the doors open. Kessler's confession, broadcast to millions before the ambush, tore through the country like a lightning strike. The FBI raided the Atlanta precinct within 48 hours. SWAT teams kicked down the doors of officers who once scoffed at the idea of accountability. Dozens were arrested. Internal Affairs, long a rubber stamp for cover-ups, was forced to act. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation reopened over 60 cold cases of police violence. 3 corrupt judges resigned. 2 more were indicted. In every press conference, every article, one name echoed like a war drum: Judge Amina Rhodes. But behind the glory was the truth. She was alive. Hidden away in a reinforced bunker under a farmhouse 50 miles outside Atlanta, tended to by Marcus Tate, the man who had once broken her heart, then risked everything to save her. And Trey, her dogged PI and lifelong ally. The woman the world mourned had scars on her shoulders, bruises on her ribs, and a knife wound stitched shut with trembling fingers. She wore sweatpants and bandages. She moved like a ghost. Because part of her was one. Amina spent her days in silence, watching news feeds from an old cracked TV, her face frozen in screenshots across CNN, MSNBC, and black news networks. Protesters chanted her name in every major city. Law students carried her image on their backpacks. Journalists called her the woman who brought a system to its knees. But Amina wasn't at peace, because the price of becoming a symbol was losing everything else. She hadn't touched Malik's face in weeks, hadn't heard his voice in person, could only watch him on TV, holding a sign at a protest with Lena behind him, her eyes swollen from crying. His shirt read, "She lived, she fought, she mattered." And Amina would trace those words with her fingers across the screen until they blurred with tears. She wanted to go to him. God, she wanted to run to him, press her forehead against his and whisper that she was still here, that she'd never leave again, that every wound, every bruise, every flame was worth it if he was safe. But she couldn't. Kessler's men might be scattered, but not all were caught. The money, the real money fed, hadn't been tracked. Deep pockets and darker forces still moved behind the curtain. Amina knew the game. You don't kill the king and expect the court to vanish. You burn the court to ash and salt the earth. So she stayed hidden. Every day, Marcus and Trey brought updates. More resignations, more protests, more bills being drafted. A National Police Oversight Board was in the works. Her gavel, scorched and found near the mill, had become the symbol of a new reform movement. Black mothers carried mini replicas in marches. Civil rights lawyers used it in speeches. But with every gain, the grief deepened. She wasn't just watching a world she changed. She was watching a life she lost. One night, unable to sleep, she wandered to the small radio Trey had rigged to a private frequency. Her fingers hovered, then pressed record. She spoke into the dark. "If you hear this, Malik, I'm sorry I had to go. I'm sorry I let the world believe I was gone. I did it to protect you, to finish what I started. They tried to kill us, baby. Tried to make sure no one like us ever stood tall again. But I'm still here, still fighting. Every day. For you. For what's right. For the truth they buried in fire. And when it's safe, I'll come back. Not as a ghost, but as your mother. Whole. Until then, don't stop fighting. You're my legacy. You're my light." Her voice broke on the last word. She turned the recorder off and set it aside, unsure if she'd ever send it. But saying it out loud, even once, mattered. It reminded her she was still human. Not just a martyr, not just a weapon. A mother. A woman. A fighter. But the battle wasn't over, because Kessler's death raised more questions than it answered. His body had been found in the rubble, DNA matched. But Amina had seen too much, fought too long to believe the official report. The man who'd nearly buried her in a courthouse bombing wouldn't die without making a statement. And yet, no manifesto, no final message, just silence. Too clean, too final. And in that silence, Amina sensed something worse. A bigger game, a darker player. The system hadn't just been Kessler. He was a symptom, not the disease. And the disease was still alive. One morning, Trey stormed into the bunker, his laptop shaking in his hands. "We've got a problem," he said, dropping into a chair beside her. "What kind of problem?" Amina asked, her chest tightening. "Survivors of the old regime are gathering. Not just cops. Judges, politicians, people who backed Kessler from the shadows." He turned the screen. An email. Leaked. Anonymous. Short and chilling. "The martyr dies. The machine rebuilds. Phase 2 begins." Amina leaned back, her mind spinning. "Phase 2, she whispered. "They're planning a counterstrike." And just like that, her rest was over. She stood. Her ribs ached, her burns flared, but her eyes, they burned hotter. "We go back underground," she said. "We dig until we find the root. We end this, all of it." And Marcus, watching from the doorway, nodded. "You ready to rise again?" She didn't smile. She just whispered, "This time, I don't come back to inspire. I come back to finish it." The Judge Amina Rhodes walked slowly through the forest, the brittle leaves crunching under her boots, the moon casting a faint silver sheen across the shadows. Her hood was pulled tight over her face, not for warmth. The Georgia summer still clung to the night air, but to stay invisible. She was a ghost now, a rumor, a martyr the world mourned, while she still bled in secret. Behind her, the farmhouse that had served as her safe house for months shrank into the trees. In her pocket, a burner phone buzzed with updates, headlines, protests, and bills born from her supposed death. The nation was moving, healing. But Amina wasn't. Not really. She'd watched it all from behind a screen. The candlelit vigils, the street murals, the crowds shouting her name like a battle cry. But the woman they painted on walls, fearless, martyred, legendary, wasn't the woman who woke up screaming at 3 a.m., reliving the warehouse fire. It wasn't the woman who traced the scar across her shoulder, remembering the feel of Maddox's boot, the stink of his breath, the ache of her broken ribs. It wasn't the woman who still hadn't hugged her son. Malik thought she was dead. And in some ways, he wasn't wrong. The Amina he knew had died in that mill. What rose from the ashes wasn't just a judge. She was a strategist, a survivor, a blade waiting to be unsheathed, and she had work to do. Work. Inside the farmhouse, Trey sat at his laptop, fingers flying over keys, eyes bloodshot from endless nights of digging. Every day, he peeled back another layer of the rot left behind by Kessler's network. What they found wasn't just corruption. It was infrastructure. Shell companies funding hate groups, court clerks laundering payouts to abusive officers, judges falsifying case notes, data tampering on a national level, cities beyond Atlanta, Memphis, Charlotte, even LA, all tracing back to the same donors, the same playbook, the same silence. Kessler's fall was only a beginning. The machine had legs. Amina watched from the doorway as Trey cursed at the screen, then slammed his fist on the table. "They're not scared," he said, voice low. "They're just regrouping. We killed the front man, not the engine." "Then we light the whole thing on fire," she replied, stepping into the room. He turned to her, this version of her, bandaged, hollow-eyed, calm in a way that was almost dangerous. She wasn't mourning anymore. She was planning. That night, a video leaked. It was grainy, black and white, and barely a minute long. It showed an unnamed woman in a hood standing beneath a crumbling courthouse wall in a city no one could identify. But the voice? Unmistakable. "You thought you killed me. You burned my name, my home, my body, but I'm still here, and I've seen who you are. This time, I'm not coming for justice. I'm coming for your legacy. I'm coming for the blood you buried under badges and back rooms, and I won't stop, not until your system is dust." The video went viral overnight. At first, the public thought it was deepfake footage, a hoax, a tribute. But then Trey hacked a police archive and dropped another file. Real-time radio audio from the courthouse bombing, the one Kessler orchestrated. In it, a single voice shouted a name. "Get Amina Rhodes out now!" A command never followed. The combination of both clips sent the nation spiraling again. Was she alive? Networks speculated. Podcasts analyzed her breathing pattern. Some called it a conspiracy. Others whispered it was hope. The candlelight vigils returned. The protest chants got louder. And somewhere in a private home on the outskirts of Montgomery, Malik stood at his bedroom window, replaying the video on a loop. His hands trembled. His eyes filled. "She's alive," he whispered, breath catching. "I knew it." Across the country, momentum surged again. Only now it was different. It wasn't mourning. It was mobilization. Amina had become something more than a judge. She had become the heartbeat of a movement. But she wasn't untouchable. That same night, Trey's firewall tripped, a silent alert. They were being tracked. Someone had pinged their signal through an encrypted server in DC. The timing was too perfect, too fast. It wasn't random. Someone in federal law enforcement was still protecting the network. The deep state web Kessler served wasn't just trying to rebuild. It was watching, waiting, which meant Amina's window was closing. She paced the farmhouse, her limbs aching, her skin tight from half-healed burns. Every breath was a reminder of what she lost. But she couldn't stop now. Not when so many still suffered. Not when she had the names, the connections, the evidence. And not when she had one final card left to play, a voice recording of Kessler, retrieved from a hacked phone line days before his supposed death. "Let her think she won. Let the fire burn. We'll rise from the smoke like we always do." His voice was cocky, cruel, and alive. Which meant his death. A lie. A trap. The man who ordered the courthouse bombing, who carved her son's arm, who framed her as a terrorist, wasn't dead. He was hiding. That night, Amina sat alone on the farmhouse porch. She lit a single candle. Not for herself, but for every name in her evidence folder. For the mothers who never got to fake their deaths. For the sons who didn't get rescued in time. For the girls who sat in jail because they couldn't afford bail set by men like Kessler. She let the silence wash over her. And then she picked up her burner and dialed a number she hadn't called since law school. It rang once, twice. A voice answered, steady, calm, familiar. "You're alive," it said. "Not for long," she replied. "Unless I burn this thing to the ground." She met with a journalist the next day. A trusted one, underground, no cameras, just facts. She handed over the Kessler audio, the hacked documents, the federal trails. And when she turned to leave, the reporter stopped her. "People need to see your face again," she said. "They need to know you survived." Amina paused. Then she shook her head. "They don't need my face," she said. "They need to see what I'm about to do." The day the truth broke wide open was quiet at first. No gunshots, no sirens, no fire licking the sky. Just a screen, flickering to life across thousands of phones, tablets, and TVs, with one image, Judge Amina Rhodes, alive, whole. Standing in front of the Georgia state capitol, flanked by federal marshals and civil rights leaders, holding the badge of the man who tried to erase her. The broadcast cut through the noise of politics and propaganda, the disinformation campaigns and smear jobs, with a voice that had once been silenced and was now sharper than ever. You thought the fire would kill me, but it forged me. You thought fear would stop me, but it only made me louder. I am not your symbol. I am not your scapegoat. I am Amina Rhodes, and I survived your war. Now I'm building something you can't burn. She dropped the scorched badge on the podium with a sharp clink, the one she'd pulled from the ashes of Aunt Lena's porch, still marked with the precinct number that tied Chief Kessler to the hate group he once secretly funded. That badge had been her proof, her compass, her fire starter. Now it was the final nail in his empire's coffin. Amina's reappearance triggered a political earthquake. Kessler, long thought dead, was dragged from a private compound in Montana just days later, pale, raging, handcuffed. The man who faked his death to escape justice faced a federal indictment that spanned 74 counts: conspiracy, domestic terrorism, kidnapping, attempted murder, evidence tampering, and more. He would never see freedom again. But the real victory? It wasn't the court ruling. It was the awakening. Amina didn't return to reclaim a bench or a title. She returned to rebuild trust in a system that had buried too many. She launched a national reform initiative. The Rhodes Project, dedicated to holding police departments and courtrooms accountable. Community watchdogs, legal defense funds, a mentorship pipeline for young Black law students, all of it funded by people who believed in what she stood for, not what she looked like in a mugshot. She visited cities whose precincts had been gutted by corruption. She walked the same steps where they once threw bottles at her and was met now with open arms, tears, and whispers of "thank you." And the moment she'd waited for, the moment that truly healed her, came on a rainy Thursday afternoon in front of her son's high school. Malik, taller now, stronger, a hint of stubble on his chin. She stepped out of the car slowly, her breath caught in her throat. He turned. Their eyes met. And in the next instant, he was running. He didn't speak, not right away, just wrapped his arms around her like he never wanted to let go. His body shook in her arms, and she held him as tight as her ribs allowed. "You came back," he whispered into her neck. "I never left," she said, tears soaking her lashes. "I just had to make sure when I came back, it was for good." He pulled away, eyes red. "You won." She nodded. "No, baby. We won." Amina's story is more than a tale of corruption or courage. It's a reminder that justice doesn't live in systems. It lives in people who refuse to break. That being afraid doesn't mean you stop. It means you dig deeper. That survival is sacred, and healing is resistance. Amina was betrayed, framed, beaten, burned, hunted. But she never became what they wanted her to be. She stayed fierce, she stayed clear, she stayed human, and in doing so, she lit a fire that couldn't be put out. Not with lies, not with bullets, not with shame. She taught us something vital, that the world will try to write your ending, but you always have the power to write your next chapter. So if you've ever felt erased, if you've ever been silenced, overlooked, underestimated, if you've ever been told you're too much, you're too loud, stay in your place. Remember Amina. Remember the judge who got kicked in court and stood back up, the mother who faced a gun to her child's head and chose to fight, the woman who let the world bury her and rose anyway. Her story is your reminder that no voice is too small when it speaks the truth. That resilience isn't about bouncing back, it's about breaking through. That you are allowed to burn and still rise brighter. If Amina's journey inspired you, hit like to show her legacy matters. Drop a "thank you, Amina" in the comments if you believe one voice can still change the world. Subscribe for more powerful stories like hers, real or imagined, but always rooted in truth, fire, and the fight for justice. Because somewhere out there, someone else is standing at the edge of the fire, wondering if they can survive. Send them this. Let them know they can. This story was for Amina, but it's also for you. Stay strong, stay sharp, and never stop rising, because justice doesn't rest, and neither should we.